First and foremost, I would sincerely like to welcome you to the board of Griffin Design Center. And believe it or not, your presence, the Afrocentric bookstore is kind of ingrained within my work and within this building. I think a lot about environment, in learning about our history and us as people, and our environment in antiquity, which was surrounded by our culture, which was surrounded by art within the walls and in the floors and in the bowls and in the tables and in the clothes and in everything that helped to reverberate this spirit of our tradition and our culture and help to kind of build these strong, creative, beautiful people. And how that tradition was severed. Those languages were lost. Those cultures and customs were kind of blown to the wind. Although there are many of them that survive that we don't recognize. You can look at a cave painting, or you can look at an African hieroglyphic, and you'll see a mother braiding a child's hair, which is a tradition that we still do today. So over those thousands of years, we're still able to hold on to some semblance of who we are. It's still inside of us. It's still buried there. So I had an experience of, walking past this bookstore and going inside and looking around at different books. And I was doing some research for a painting that I was working on. And the title of the painting is When God Was Black. And it's this idea that there was a time in antiquity where everyone in the world wanted to be like the blacks. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, all these different people. They came to Egypt, they came to Ethiopia, they came to Nubia to get this knowledge, to get this. So I picked up this book called The Isis Papers. I'm like, okay, maybe this has got something to do with Egypt. And I'm reading it by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And just the concept kind of opened up a whole different window of consciousness, and had a major effect on the work that I was creating and the social commentary that I was doing in my artwork, and kind of set things on a different path. And that path has led to, me meeting my wife and her being of Haitian descent, and learning about the history of Haiti and how their revolution from the French is what sparked the consciousness for us to even have a revolution and, end slavery within the United States, and how integral this country was, and how devastated it is now, but not by chance, but because, the colonial powers that be wanted to make sure that they did not serve as an example of independent black people. But however, those different aspects, those different parts of my life kind of coming together, all based on this initial walk into a bookstore. And at the time, you being a proprietor of that bookstore may not have even fathomed the reverberating effects of that environment and what it could have on individuals. I'm sure you did, but this is a visual, literal example of the effects of environment. So when we were creating a space, we were looking for a space. Quick story. I grew up on the northwest side of Chicago, and went to Faraday High School. First year of high school was at Austin High School. I was not into art at all. I used to draw a little bit as a kid. And my grandfather took ill, and my family moved from the west side to Pilsen, which is a Hispanic neighborhood. And I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. Oh my God, I grew up with, all my friends, everything is gone. Everybody I know is black now. Everybody around me is, Mexican. And the high school I went to was, transferred to was Benito Juarez High School. And the year before, they had just built this high school. So my idea about high school was, I can't wait until the bell so I can get up out of here. And I had finished the class, English class, and I was doodling, and this girl behind me said, "Oh, you know, it's really good. You can draw, you know. We need an artist for the school newspaper." I was like, we get to write our own stories. We get to, you know, we have deadlines sometimes. We get out of class. I'm like, back up, we get out of class? So I went down, talked to the teacher. She was like, you can really draw. You know what art class is it? I don't have any art class. I got general music. So she said, oh, we're going to change that. So she changed my classes from general music to studio art 1. So I got introduced to drawing and painting. We did like a little, you know, paint something, any subject you want. So I painted my hand. And
which is very different.
Okay, well, I ain't nothing else. I paint my hand. And watercolors. And everybody came around. Oh my God, you paint? So the Art Institute didn't teach me how to paint. I actually already knew how to paint. And for me, it was drawing with paint. But because of that interaction with Connie, her name was Consuelo Casacuado, I took studio art 2. I was in a photography club. I was on the basketball team. I was in a literature club. I stayed at school. School became the place I wanted to be. Won a scholarship to the Art Institute. Later on, opened the gallery, had a gallery in the River North down the street from Sam Kenya, and then Namdi and Nicole's gallery. And so this thing was kind of inside of me. And I think about that with other kids. There's so much, you know, a kid could be a great concert pianist, but if they never get a chance to sit down in front of a piano, how would they know? If you never get the experience, if the environment doesn't nurture you, how do you become what you're meant to be? And that in large part was a reason why we wanted to have a place that could create it. I would used to walk the halls of the Art Institute. As a student, you know, your ID gives you free access to the museum. And I used to walk the halls and see all these paintings, you know, El Greco and Michelangelo and, you know, Rubens, Picasso, Monet, whoever. And people would say, oh, this is genius. I remember a class I was in, a color theory class, and the professor had us standing in front of a sculpture that Picasso did. It was a bicycle head and bicycle horns. And it's called Bull's Head. And the professor said, these are two ordinary everyday objects, but it took the genius of Picasso to put them together to create this piece of art. And I'm thinking, I see brothers build cars out of milk crates and you know, they take a buggy from this, and I see this all the time. But nobody's calling us geniuses. The whole museum is full of artwork that none of it looks like me. It's all supporting white kids, telling them how great they are. Look at all the stuff we stole. So, and at the time, the kind of art that you see is academic realism, mostly. There's some abstraction here, there's some cubism here, which all of that really came from Africa. But they didn't really, this was not what was being emphasized when I was at the Art Institute in the 80s, in the early 80s. They were pushing, you know, abstract expressionism and Frank Stella and all these different people. And, but growing up as an artist, the work that impressed me the most was academic realism. I would see this, oh my God, that piece looks like I can walk inside of it. I want to be able to do that. So that's what my focus was. And although I do abstract pieces and I do different, when people will gravitate towards that, oh, I like the colors, but when people are emotionally invested in a piece of work, it's this work. It's that work that is, you can relate to spiritually, physically, psychologically. That was the nourishment that we had around us as a culture growing up. So that's the kind of nourishment that me and my wife are trying to create within this space.
Well, I think you've done it very well. And I didn't tell you how I got started. I grew up around pimps and hoes slamming Cadillac doors on the west side of Chicago. Okay. My mother was in the sex trade. And she was dead at 34. My sister had her first child at 14, second child at 16, third child at 18. By the time she was 27, she had 6 children, 5 different fathers. I've been on my own since I was 16 years old. What saved my life was art. I read Richard Wright's Black Boy at 14 years old. And reading Black Boy, it introduced me to ideas. And as you know, ideas and the creators of ideas and the carriers of ideas run the world. And Richard Wright, reading Black Boy, reading almost every other page was slapping me in the face, you know. And my mother had demanded that I go to the library and check out Black Boy. But I hated myself so much that I refused, but she demanded that I go. So I went to the library. I didn't ask the white librarian for the book because I didn't want to deal with white librarians. Okay, so I'm 79, son. And so this was back in the 50s. And I went to the shelf, found Black Boy on the shelf, put it to my chest and walked to an unpeopled section of the library and sat down and began to read. And so for the first time in my life, I was reading ideas, I was reading literature that was not an insult to my own personhood, okay? And being this color, you know, yellow, black. So you're always warring between black, black, brown, black, yellow, black, okay? But Black Boy gave me a foundation. I read Black Boy in less than 24 hours at 14 years old. Gave it to my mother, went back the next day and checked out everything Richard Wright had published at that time. You know, Native Son, people know Native Son, all right? But most people do not know that he wrote a lot of literary nonfiction, political nonfiction. And one of his major books, which very few people have read, is White Man Listen. It's back in the 50s, White Man Listen. And in that book, there was an essay on, at that time, Negro writing, okay? And I went through that essay, as well as the other essays in the book, I always write and read with a pen, and I mark up everything. And I'm 14, all right? And so every author that he wrote about in that essay, I began to systematically read, all right? That is what began to develop a consciousness in me that say, okay, there's another world out there that we're not being taught in these high schools and grade schools, whatever the case may be. And my mother was on the down at this point. She was on a downslide. She was into drugs, into alcohol, and you know, maybe less than a half a year from that point, she sold herself for a weekend with someone and never came back. And so I, at 14, 15 years old, on the weekend would go out looking for her if she didn't come back on Monday. And I found her. She had been murdered, all right? Now, in the neighborhood we grew up in, which was the Lower East Side of Detroit, Michigan, and the West Side of Chicago, and as you know, you can just easily find yourself into a community which is not going to nurture you at all. And my sister had just had her first child at 14 years old. And so I went looking for the guy that impregnated her, okay? Now I'm 15 now, 6 foot, 139 pounds, yellow black, going after one of the top gang members in Detroit. And I found I used to carry a lead pipe around in my pocket, my belt actually. I walked up on the guy, I hit him, knocked him down. The problem is he got up. He got up and he and his men just, you know, beat me to the point where I almost died. I made it home. My mother asked me, what had happened to you? And I told her, and then she whooped me from getting whooped. That's how bad off she was and we were in terms of our family. I'm gonna skip. So in terms of people wanted to find out about that early life of mine, here it is. I wrote Yellow Black, and that's my mother on the cover, okay? And fast forward, I ended up in the military. So the military at that time, as it is today, was a poor boy's answer to unemployment. Today is a poor boy, poor girl's answer to unemployment. And I just stayed in trouble. But what I did in the military, it was in between wars. For me, it was 1960 to 63. And mainly white. And so I stayed in battle with these white supremacists in the military. And they kept moving it around because I could not stay out of trouble dealing with these ignorant white men, all right? And so I was able to get out of the military because I used the military as undergraduate school. I would read close to a book a day when I was in the military. And I would write. That's when I started writing. And so when I came out of the military, I used a GI Bill to go to school. Okay. And that, again, but at the same time, it took me into the struggle community. Because in 1962, I was stationed at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. I saw this ad in the Chicago Defender for the Ebony Museum of Negro History. So I'm coming up, not able to talk to nobody, not even no one. They're just not conscious, okay? And so I found myself going to the museum at 3806 South Michigan Avenue. Knocked on the door, and the white man answered the door. I said, "Oh, God, I'm in the wrong place." But the white man was a Jewish white man by the name of Eugene Feldman, who had been chased out of the South, found his way to, at that time, it was the Ebony Museum of Negro History. And Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs. Thank you. And so what happened, I asked Mr. Feldman, I say, is Dr. Burroughs said, well, she wasn't a doctor at that time, but there's Mrs. Burroughs here. And he took me to the kitchen. These next two things really changed my life for the best. I walked into the kitchen, and she's working on a linoleum cut. She's a world-class visual artist, all right? And she's working on this linoleum cut. I'm looking at her work, and I'm looking at her. And she looked up and said, "What do you want, boy?" All right? I had never seen a black woman with a natural. This is 1962, all right? She got natural hair, all right? And I said, "Well, you know, Ms. Burrow, I need to talk to somebody. I'm reading all this literature, I'm trying to write myself, and there's no one to talk to." She said, "Go upstairs and talk to my husband." I went to the second floor, and Charlie Burroughs is sitting at a kind of a conference table, writing and reading. He got books here, and he's writing. He's got, I thought it was a glass of water, clear water over there. He said, "Come on in." Say, "You know, what can I do for you?" And say, "I just need to talk to somebody, especially another black man." He said, "Well, yeah, sit down. You want something to drink? You want something?" I say, "I'll take some water." He said, "No, this is vodka." Now understand, Brother Gerald, I never drank or smoked. I never been high. I'm probably one of the few black men who've been through the military, never drank, smoked, and been high. And you know, I'm a vegan, okay? So what happened, I wasn't a vegan then, but I am now, but for the last 40 years. But the point is that he said, "I'll get you some water." Got it himself. He began to sit down and talk to me. The important thing about talking to Charlie Burroughs is that he had been raised partially in the USSR. He spoke Russian fluently. So he was the one that introduced me to Alexander Pushkin, okay? He was the one that introduced me to the great Russian writers, all right? But I'm 18, 19 years old now, all right? But I'll never forget this because he began to introduce me to Marxism and boom, boom, the whole left thing. So I'm being schooled by somebody who actually spoke the language and basically understood the culture. And I'm going back to this word culture because it's so important. One of the major problems in our community is that we do not have our own culture, okay? And what you see, you can tell where a family is by going into their private space. Okay? So when I walked in here today, I knew without any hesitation that this is black. Because the first thing you do when you walk into a family you do not know, the first thing, at least I notice, is it clean? Is it clean? Is it clean? Then I'm going to look on the walls and see what's on the walls. Are the images on the walls images that reflect the best of us? Okay? Then I'm going to the bookcase, if you have a damn bookcase. You see what you're reading. That defines you. And then you go to the music. What kind of music are you listening to? Is it great black music or is it booty call music? What are you listening to? All right. Then you talk about what are you looking at night on television? You know, especially at that time, the DVDs or whatever wrapped up in the brown paper bags. That's what you're looking at, okay? But to really tell what that family is, you go into the children's room. What's on their walls? Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Darth Vader. And you wonder why we are confused, my young brother, why we are confused. So for me, quite early, Malcolm X mentored me. Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, all right? Never knew him, but I knew of him. I knew what he was reading. I knew what he was doing with the Nation of Islam, all right? And I knew what happened when he was assassinated. Because the assassination of Malcolm X matured all of his cultural sons and daughters, in the sense that we said, America does not want us, okay? And you can say the same for King too, but I'm talking about Malcolm was my man in the beginning, okay? And that was the start of the black arts movement nationally. Because artists, visual, musicians, writers, poets, dancers, choreographers, playwrights, all over the country, we started to build our own theaters, bookstores, publishing companies, almost credit unions, everything. Now, that was not my bookstore in Hyde Park. We had 3 bookstores, but our flagship store was on Cottage Grove, 7524 South Cottage Grove. That was not only our flagship store, and we bought that property. That was our flagship store, and we had a typesetting company, we had a credit union, we had our beginning of our schools, New Concept School, going from kindergarten to the 3rd grade, food co-op, all right, and we bought a farm. We had a farm in South Haven, Michigan, because we're going to get our babies out of the city when the revolution comes. And we stayed in shape. Okay? So let me just kind of, wind this up. But my point is that we felt that any people who are in control of their own cultural imperatives are about the healthy replication of ourselves. And if you don't know who you are, anybody can name you. And they will. And that's what has happened to us. And so we are in struggle, all right, all of us. All the young people we worked with during that period, we're serious about this, okay? Because we started in terms of property, over on 78th and Ellis, we had 2 storefronts that we were in, Institute of Positive Education and Third World Press. And we were basically influencing our community, all right? And we all lived in the black community and so forth. And then we bought the property on Cottage Grove, okay? We enlarged everything, okay? We stayed there for about 10 years, but we had 3 bookstores. We had a bookstore there, we had a bookstore in South Shore, and we had a bookstore in Hazel Crest, Illinois, okay? And the reason we got out of the retail business because of Borders Books, Barnes & Noble, they opened up right very close to us. And we said, okay, we're going to get out of this business and put all of our resources into our schools and into the publishing company. I'm just going to get this final thing here. How did we end up at 78th and 79th in Ellis and Dobson? We bought that parish, okay? They didn't want to sell it to us, especially me, because at that time, from Donnell Lee to Haki Madhubuti, you had a certain gravitas in the city that was not necessarily positive among the people that run stuff, okay? Because I went down to the archdiocese saying, because the Catholic that parish had been closed for about 2 or 3 years. Nobody was in there, but there's some people in the rectory. So I went down to talk to the people at the archdiocese, and the white man, after he got through mispronouncing my name, said no. He said, we got somebody who's interested in it. Well, I knew he lying, okay. So I got back out south. I said, who actually makes the decisions on the south side of Chicago? Now, you got Cardinal Bernardine running the whole thing, but there was a man by the name of Bishop Winton Gregory. He was out in South Holland. We started calling his office. Can I talk to you? Leaving Haki Madhubuti. He never returned, so I called back and said, left Don L. Lee. His secretary called back and said, are you the poet? I said, yes, I'm the poet. I need to talk to Bishop Gregory. It's an emergency. So he said, you got 15 minutes 2 weeks from now. I said, can I please have those 15 minutes? So, I tied up and everything and got some books and went out there. 15 minutes turned into 2 hours. And when I left, Bishop Winton Gregory, I had a letter from him to Cardinal Bernardine stating unequivocally that we need to be at the top of the list, all right, in terms of getting that property, because they're not giving it to you, you've got to buy it. And the guy was asking $1 million for it, okay? And we're not fools. We're not going to pay $1 million for that piece of property on the south side of Chicago, and basically nobody's occupying it. So we were able to come down far less than probably half of that. But we had to put a lot of money in it and a lot of sweat equity into it to bring it up to stuff. So that's why and how we got that property, because we weren't going anywhere else other than, say, the black community on the south side of Chicago, and it worked out for us. So when I walked in here today, I see that you all have advanced at a level that very few black people are able to get to. And the major reason you're able to get to this level is that you're conscious. You know who you are, okay? And you're not apologizing to anybody. And I asked you, before I went into the men's room, where'd the money come from? Because that's what I'm saying, and you told me something which I don't hope you don't mind me sharing with people. Me and my wife, okay? And that was the formula that my wife and I use. I mean, we're educators. She retired from Northwestern. I retired from Chicago State by way of DePaul University, okay? Because I was at Chicago State for 26 years. Prior to that, I was teaching at what they call R1, Research 1 universities, when I was 26 years old. My first job was at Columbia College here in Chicago. And my second position was at Cornell University, all right? And ended up at Cornell. Ebony did this big spread on me about black poet at an Ivy League university, first one. But I ended up at Howard. I'm going to end on part of my story on this Howard thing. Andrew Billingsley, Dr. Andrew Billingsley, one of the major sociologists in the country, was the provost. After Ebony published a piece, my third book, Don't Cry, Scream, sold over 75,000 copies. Poets don't sell that kind of books in this country, all right? But because the article in Ebony and my cultural mother, Gwendolyn Brooks, wrote the introduction, it just jumped off the shelf. So Andrew Billingsley calls me and said, we want you to come teach at Howard. Now, I always wanted to go to Howard, but I couldn't afford, obviously, to go to Howard. And so he brought me in and said, we're building this new institute here, and Dr. Stephen Henderson wants you to be the poet in residence at Howard University. So I said, yes. One condition. He said, what is that condition? I want to commute. Because I cannot leave Chicago again like I left and went to Ithaca, New York. But I want to commute every week between Chicago and D.C. He said, no. He said, you got Sterling Brown here. We got Chancellor Williams here. We got Warren Walters here. Jeff Donaldson was there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Jeff Donaldson is the head of the art department. I can go on and on. He said, you talking about commuting? I said, yes, sir. He said, no. I got up and left. Before I got out the building, his secretary is coming after me, Professor Lee. The same was still Lee at the time. Dr. Billingsley wanted to see you. Okay. He said, you drive a hard bargain, young man, but we got something for you. We want you to be poet in residence here at Howard University to help us build this Institute for the Arts and Humanities. We give you a full professor salary. We found a grant for you to travel back and forth every week for the next 3 years to Chicago, to DC. But you've got to get an apartment here, okay, which I did. 3 years turned into 8 years, okay? And I only left because my wife, at that time I wasn't married, but my wife, we got married, and babies started coming. And my wife said, you got to come home, all right? So, and there's a lot more. I'm not even talking, I didn't put Africa in there. I didn't put all the conferences in Africa that I went to. I didn't put in, I met 4 African presidents. There's a whole lot. Now, and I'll just end with this. The difference between me and other poets from the Black arts movement, none of my books have been published by white publishers. Every other poet coming out of that same tradition, they've been white publishers. And you know, I can tell you how it harmed me in the new museum we got in DC. When I went to visit that museum, you saw the Black arts movement, and you saw 2 or 3 of the other poets, but not me. But he saw me in the exhibit for Broadside Press, all right? My mentors, Elijah Malik Ishbaz, Malcolm X, Margaret and Charlie Burroughs, Dudley Randall, who founded the first black publisher for poets in the world, Broadside Press in Detroit, Michigan. I modeled Third World Press off of. Hoyt W. Fuller. Hoyt W. Fuller is so critical to our struggle that I don't want anybody to forget about him, because Hoyt Fuller was the managing editor of Negro Digest Black World magazine. And that was the major vehicle for the development of our people in terms of chronicling the Black arts movement. So here's Negro Digest, and then here's Black World. Now you can see in this issue of Black World magazine, this June 1972, the relevancy of Don L. Lee as a contemporary black poet, all right? And this is about the Black University.
So, you know, as an artist, for me as an artist, I can't speak to other artists. Me as an artist, I'm always thinking of creating a piece of art is like having a conversation. And right at the beginning, 2019, 2020, when there was all this upheaval, there was all of this, you know, the killings of the Black Lives Matter movement, from Trayvon Martin to, and you could just go down the line, on and on, Sandra Bland, all these different people getting killed. And it led to the marches for justice and equal rights. And that led to black people being conscious about their environment in terms of romanticized monuments, sculptures, Confederate flags, all these different monuments that romanticized and venerated white supremacy, basically. And people had this visceral reaction. They wanted to tear it down. They wanted to spray paint it. They wanted to just, you know, this is not history. Our story isn't up there. You know what I'm saying? Christopher Columbus was a slave trader. You know, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner who impregnated, you know, his slave and kept his children into slavery. And we need to tear down that monument. And cities and, you know, counties were pulling their hair out, like, how are we going to deal with it? We got the Italians over here saying we want to keep this up. We got the black people over here who want to tear it down. And I said, what would be a creative social response to this? And I came up with this idea that instead of tearing down the monuments, which, although it's a skewed history, then there would be no history. My story still isn't out there. Their fantasized story isn't out there. My story isn't out there. Nobody's story is out there. I said, what would be if we can create a counterbalance? So if there's a statue of Thomas Jefferson, maybe there should be a statue of Sally Hemings and her kids. right next to it. So now you're telling the full scope of who Thomas Jefferson was. And it opens up the conversation about the romanticized personality and brings it down to earth. And we're dealing with real history, historical events. And I did this proposal to create 100 life-size, monumental-size paintings and sculptures all over the country. And I wanted to start with 10 in Chicago and surrounding areas, regional. And I would, at the time, everybody was on lockdown. So I would incorporate other artists, kind of create work. And within that work, we would be nourishing our culture and our history, and we'd be creating these different monuments that could go in, not just in our neighborhoods, but in the main public square. Because the Christopher Columbus statue is in Grant Park. It's in Michigan Avenue. It's in the middle of the public square. And that's where our conversation should also be. You know, that's where there's currently a sculpture of John Baptiste du Sable, small bust, that sits on the bridge on Michigan Avenue. And maybe a block down is a sculpture of Harry Carey that's 1.5 times life size. And I'm like, okay, the founder of Fort Dearborn in Chicago, his sculpture is in no fanfare. You walk by it and barely see it. And a sportscaster, a white sportscaster, has a huge monument right next to the Tribune Tower. So why shouldn't there be a large 2 times life-size sculpture of du Sable? If he's so integral to the city, he's so integral to, the existence, and it would change the paradigm of black people living in the city to know that this whole thing has its roots in black people settling here.
Correct.
So I sent out this proposal. I sent one to the Senate, the senator's office. I sent one to the mayor. And a friend of mine at the time was working on, who worked on Mayor Lightfoot's campaign. He said, I can get it to the mayor. I'll get it to, he sent it to the mayor. And she emailed him back, oh, thanks, Al. I'm going to take a look at this, and I'll get back to you. I never heard anything back.
Don't let me tell you my story about that. Now you're going with it, I'll tell you my story about Lightfoot. It's just another whole world.
Yeah, I never heard anything back from that. And so I said, well, like with so many things that I've done, my instinct and my nature is just to do it. I don't wait on permission. I don't wait on somebody to say it. So I started working on these monuments. I started working, the first one I did was a bust of Kamala Harris because she was running for president. She wasn't the vice president, she was a candidate. But it was this black woman who was running for president, so I did a bust of her. I did one of Obama, a full figure of Obama, and he has his head down like this, and on his feet are broken shackle and chains, because Obama represents a certain level of progress, but he still has the chains at his feet because he didn't, we're not there. We're like that painting on a quest for freedom. And the one I'm currently working on is a life-size bust of Frederick Douglass. And it is, and I'm partnering with Pigment International to really get these pieces out there. And they've been extremely supportive in trying to nourish artists for literary artists, poets, visual artists, and kind of be a vehicle for us to have a voice. The third Frederick Douglass piece is a young Frederick Douglass, because Martin Luther King was in his 30s. It's the young people out there marching Black Lives Matter. It's the young people who are fighting and dying and putting their lives on the line. The older generation are the guideposts. For me, they're like Anubis. They're guides. They're guiding us through the world, and we can use their light and their experience to help us go forward. And so this is a young Frederick Douglass who's, holding his lapel, nice dress, and he's looking up, because that was the young abolitionist who was fighting slavery and who escaped slavery. Behind his back, he's holding a manacle and chains, broken chains, because that's where he came from. That's the past. And a 2 times life-size monument like that would, I think, would spark the consciousness of people, because it would ask, first, it would make them ask questions. First off, who is this guy? What is this? And then you tell the story of Frederick Douglass. Okay, well, I'm used to Frederick Douglass, the older statesman who was advisor to Lincoln. I'm used to the Frederick Douglass after, you know, John Brown had his thing and got killed, after Harriet Tubman. I'm used to that guy. This is a young guy. Yeah, that's the radical guy who, you know, like in your own life, like in so many of those lives, like Malcolm X and all these different guys, that's the guy who was out there making the world change. And behind his back, you see he's holding that chain. It talks about the history of Frederick Douglass being, you know, a runaway slave. And those narratives and stories are important, not just the fact that he was a slave, but the fact that he self-educated himself, that he ran away from slavery, that he did all of the, you know, abolitionists, that he did these things to change the world. And he's young, just like you, and you can do exactly what he did. I remember growing up as a kid, and I used to see these big billboards of this guy, and he had these glasses on. I didn't know who he was. It's Malcolm X, you know, Muhammad Speaks, Malcolm X posters. And as I got older and found out who Malcolm X was, you know, read the autobiography of Malcolm X, it's long after his death, I can relate back and remember, I used to see those posters, you know. And to me, Malcolm X looked weird because this was a guy who had a suit and a tie and, you know, straight leg pants and a funny haircut. And at the time, nobody was dressed like that, you know what I'm saying? This guy was like who was that guy? But, you know, you for me, you know, I grow up, you learn, you see those references, and you understand that that presence has a reverberating effect on your life at different times. It's like a book. You read a book at one stage, and it tells you one thing. And then 10 years later, you read the same book, and it's an entirely different book. And then 10 years later, you can read the book, or you can see the painting, and it's an entirely different painting. And I think that's the sign of a great piece of art.
You're right, and the whole democratization of art, in terms of how art frees the people. And as I mentioned earlier, I found myself in art. So what happened as a result of art, for me, it was not only the literature and the music, but the visual art. Okay? And that's what I would spend my money on. Okay? And the problem we have now, you talk about Black Lives Matter. So I grew up and came out of a culture. What we are fighting for now, we fought for then. And for the most part, the changes have been minute, very little. And so this is why what you're doing here is so incredible and incredibly important, okay? And that why we need to most certainly continue to support you and pigment art and so forth. But somehow we got to figure out how to get people here, to get people in here. And what can be a program, most certainly we can bring our students from our schools here.
Yeah, I would love to.
But all the schools.
I have a not-for-profit called Artist Life NFP. It's 501(c) that I started when we opened this place. And the mission of the Artist Life is to teach not just the skills and techniques of art, but the business side of art. How do you take that piece, how do you, understanding that that's a commodity and that there's a market for it, and how do you build that market? How do you start the business? How do you write a artist statement? How do you create your portfolio? How do you approach a gallery or a museum? How do you curate a show? How do you start building up your collector's list? So a 12-week, you know, every Saturday for 2 hours session of Artist Life would start off, okay, learning the fundamentals of a painting and how to create that painting. And then how do you frame it? So we have a full framing facility in the back. So you learn how to frame your piece. How do you curate it? All the pieces will be hung in the gallery, and then students will hang their piece, write all their labels. We'll have a black tie opening. Their pieces will be for sale. Everyone who's interested in their work, they'll write down their name and start building up their collector base. They'll sell the piece and get a commission. You have to take part of the commission for yourself, and with the other part, you have to start a bank account. So from the time that you started this class to the time that you're finished, now you're an artist, you sold a piece, you have collectors, and you have a bank account for your business. And understanding that you have within you the capacity for everything you want. You just create it. My grandfather, when I was in college, and he passed before I was finished, he told me this story about his life. And he worked here, it was Baldwin Ice Cream Company or something. He worked for them for almost 25 years. And he said their plant closed. And he had 5 kids. And he just had to go home to try to figure out, what I'm gonna tell him, there's no check coming. And he said he stopped at this little restaurant, diner or something. And he got some coffee, and he was just trying to think about what he was gonna do. And he asked the waitress for, a pencil, and he put this sign in the back of his truck. And the guy tapped him on the shoulder. "This your truck out there?" Yeah, yes, sir. So you're a contractor, you painting and stuff? He said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you do electric?" He said, "I do it all." He said, "I got a couple buildings down the street. I want you to come by next week if you work out." He said he didn't know how to do none of that. He just created a new reality, just like that. What am I gonna do? Okay, I can paint a little bit, I'm a decorator. And he learned, and he did that until he retired. My older brother worked for him. So, Steve, look at this contract and decorating. I'm like, so he didn't go and ask somebody for a piece of paper, a certificate, or permission. He just created his reality. Same thing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Same thing in Bronzeville. Black people didn't get any, 40 acres and a mule. No, you're not getting that no more. Okay, fine. We're just gonna create a whole metropolis. Successful. Left alone, we can create any kind of success. That creative ability is what you have. You are a natural artist, whether it's in visual art, poetry, building, whatever. Dr. Daniel Hill Williams did the first open heart surgery. He didn't read it in a book. How did he know how to take somebody's heart out their body and operate on it? He just made it up.
Yeah, there's two sides to all of this, though.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned Daniel Williams, but there was Providence Hospital.
Yeah, Providence Hospital.
But Providence doesn't exist now. I think that's our dilemma. So Black Lives Matter, which after Brother Floyd was murdered by a police officer, they began to receive donations from around the world to where I think the last close to $90 million.
Wow.
So it has brought about a separation. Okay. And the 3 sisters out of Missouri that founded Black Lives Matter, not getting into that, but the point is that you got 2 sides of all of this, right? You talked about Trayvon Martin, and it affected all of us, but what affected me more was Tamir Rice out of Cleveland. And when they murdered Tamir Rice, I could not sleep. And my wife would tell you, I would get up every morning and work on this book from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And I wrote it in 90 days. Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy. Okay? But for me, it was not only that, but what started, this book is sold, over 1 million copies in print. Black Men, Obsolete, Single, Dangerous. And so the coming out of the 60s, We were activists, artists, okay? And that's what I see this as, okay? But you adapt to your own time, okay? And for us, and I worked very closely with Dr. King when he came to Chicago. I was in all the marches there. And worked very closely with SNCC and CORE and SCLC. But I realized what was actually missing. See, there are over 90,000 Negro churches in the United States, 90,000. The major black institution or the major Negro institution, and I use that word advisedly, are black churches. But what people don't realize is that the major business in the black community are black churches. Okay? So the question for me was, where are the black institutions that are not, quote unquote, religious? All right. Secular, but at the same time spiritual. So you cannot walk in here without having a spiritual force there. It automatically captures you, you see. Not only in terms of the presentation, but in terms of the art itself. All right. And so for me, coming up, being influenced by the literature, the music, the visual arts, and being influenced by Malcolm, Charlie and Margaret Burroughs, Dudley Randall, Horace W. Fuller, Barbara Ann Sizemore. Barbara Ann Sizemore, who was a major educator, influenced my wife and I. But Barbara Ann Sizemore was the first black superintendent of the public school system in Washington, D.C. I was teaching at Howard, and I went to interview her for our magazine. We had a magazine, Blackness Bulletin. I don't need to bring all that stuff out now. And then, of course, Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks had a major, major influence on me and literally millions of other people, too.
Yeah, yeah.
But Third World Press Foundation now, we publish all of her works, all of her books, okay? And so I'm saying that you bring to the world what you can at the time that you have been called. So just like all these ministers have been called, I've been called, okay? You've been called. And you use your talent and your genius, actually, to create for our community, in our community, okay? And so, the democracy for black people never existed in this country. Yeah. Never, even today. And see what's happening today. And what our people, see, what's happening in our community, my dear brother, is that you have ignorant people talking about how ignorant other people are. You cannot go to any of our politicians and ask them, what are you reading now? And tell me the latest book you've read. It will be a blank stare and say, take that off camera. Don't make sure that's not on camera, all right? Because they can't tell us. The best way to cure ignorance is to read books. The best way to essentially annihilate ignorance is to read books. Mm-hmm. The next best way is to develop a culture that includes books, art, music, drama, dance, all of that, all right? And what's happening in our schools, they're taking art out. Everything is STEM now.
Yeah, they are, which is another thing why I think, which is the reason why I wanted to create an environment like this. I never walked into an environment like this growing up and going to museums and traveling all around. I never walked into a place where, and I've been to a lot of different, black small galleries and things like that, but a space that was comparable to an upscale museum, that's what I wanted to create here. The art would be everywhere, and it just, it eventually will include other art. It's all my art now because, we're just building it. But I wanted to have a place where we could come in and put on armor because, I look at it like you're in a war. Everybody knows about it but us. So we walk around with no helmet, no gun, no flag, no nothing, no jacket, nothing. We just walking around naked, and everybody else is armed. And then we get shot down and wondering what's going on. I was telling somebody just about environment and how society is built to nurture white kids so much. And in everything is made for them. You get cut, you buy a Band-Aid, it's pink because it's supposed to camouflage your cut. So it's the color, but everybody's not pink. They don't care about you. They care about the pink people. You look at money. All you need is the numbers. Why you got a face on there? A little kid can say, that looks like my grandfather. That looks like, it talks about value. People kill for that. And the image on there says, this image is valuable. There's a void in the black community when black kids grow up to see value in themselves. And I think to be able to have an environment where you come and you get that nurturing, it helps you to put on armor before you have to walk out the door and face the barrage. When you're at home, nobody says you're black. They just say, hey, Haki, hey, Patricia, hey, Gerald, how you doing? When you walk out the door, you get pulled over by the cops, you go into a store, you buy something, and everything that you do is based on the fact that you're a black man. And that this connotation has been labeled for black people. So follow him around the store. The white guy could be over there loading up a bag. Follow him around the store. A black kid, hey, what are you doing? A police officer went to a school and broke up a argument and put handcuffs on a 5-year-old kid. A 5-year-old kid. And I said, if that was a 5-year-old white kid, not only would he lose his job, his boss would lose his job, the mayor would get fired. They would be like, how dare you not only assault the child, but assault the consciousness of a 5-year-old
Keep that word in your mind. See, when you talk about black, okay, now you can walk through this beautiful space here and you see black. But black is more than just color. See, black also is color, it's culture, and it's consciousness. So when we say black, we're talking about color, and then with culture, gives you a sense of identity, purpose, and direction. All right? Which gives you consciousness. All right? And so we are at war, but the problem is we do not understand the war that we're in, number one. And number two, you're a guerrilla warrior. See, what a guerrilla, and I am too, but I'm saying what a guerrilla warrior does, what he or she does, he or she can walk into the camp of the enemy, receive what we need to receive from those enemies, but bring it back to our community and continue to develop. Okay? That's the beauty of what you're doing here, you see. But if you cannot define, say if you can only define black as just the color, then you're missing the two most important parts, culture and consciousness.
That's true. That's what, to kind of bring this full circle, the major art publications, Art News, New Art Examiner, when you quote unquote make it as an artist, then you're featured in those. You're featured in Architecture Digest. You're featured in Art News magazine. You're featured in this place. You're featured in that place, and you're featured in major white institutions. And people say, "Oh my God, you had a piece at Christie's, Sotheby's. Oh my, you made it." Black people say, "Oh my, he had a piece that sold at Christie's." And we bought into this whole idea that the validation of white people validates you. And if you don't get that validation, then you're worthless. So the efforts of Patricia and Phyllis in creating Pigment International and creating a magazine or a vehicle or book that gives you validation, not just gives you validation, but helps to validate you and make you understand that we can define what we are, who we are, how important we are. We don't have to wait on This is the story my grandfather told me. You don't have to wait on someone else to tell you who you are, what your capacity is. We can create our own art news magazine. We can create our own, and it's just as valid. In fact, it's more valid, because when Picasso got ready to become Picasso, he went to Africa and he looked at those batik patterns, and he looked at those Bakota masks, and he looked at those, Sankofa masks, and he looked at all these things, and he started sketching them out. He started making those faces like those Mali masks, and they said, "Oh my God, what is that?" Right. And he says, "Cubism." Right. He said, "Father, he created a new style." How you create a new style? You go to Africa and find it. It's right there. Right. We already have it,
but we don't appreciate it, and because we don't know, and we only do what we've been taught to do. So if all your life you've been taught to be a European, then you're going to be a European in blackface. Okay. One of the major influences on my life was Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks was the first black to win the Pulitzer Prize, which is the top literary prize in this country. It's the top one. Okay. She only finished 2 years of college. I was at Wilson Junior College here in Chicago, which is the same junior college I went to also. And when I met Gwendolyn Brooks in 1967, she was teaching the Blackstone Rangers poetry writing. Okay, so I and other poets walked in on her to introduce ourselves. So when she finished the class, she walked over to introduce herself to us. And I had published my first book. My first book, the title was Think Black. Okay, and it was a white cover with the continent of Africa in the middle of it, and then Think Black over there on the top, then Donnell Lee. Gwendolyn Brooks took the book, she looked at it for about 5 or 6 seconds, then she put it to her heart and said, "Young man, I'm gonna read this tonight." Okay, and that started a 33-year relationship. But the key point in that relationship, she was at the major white book publisher in the world, Harper and Row. I was coming with Broadside Press out of Detroit, Michigan with Dudley Randall. And so Gwendolyn Brooks and I became, like mother and son. And so she decided to do 2 things. One, she got a natural. I didn't tell her to get a natural. But the influence of these young writers around her and these young women with naturals, she got a natural. She was 50 years old. Okay. The second thing she decided to do was to leave Harper and Row. Her last book, In the Mecca, was the last book. She left Harper and Row and went to Broadside Press in Detroit, Michigan with Dudley Randall. And her first book to come out of Broadside Press was a book titled Riot. And the artist to do the frontal piece of the book was Jeff Donaldson. Okay? And so Paula Gettings, who wrote When and Where I Enter and did the book on Ida B. Wells, she was working at Random House. I had published my 3rd book, which did very well. She came to Chicago to recruit me for Random House. I told Paula, I'm not leaving Broadside Press, but I'd never been to New York. Would you bring me to New York? Like you recruited me for Random House. She did. She took me to Random House. And the first person she took me to meet in Random House, who was an editor, was Toni Morrison. She took me into Toni Morrison's office, and Toni said, "Don, we're waiting on you. We're ready for you, okay?" And so I told Toni, I love black people. I can't leave Broadside Press. So with Gwendolyn Brooks leaving Harper and Row, my saying no to Random House set up my life. That since she was leaving, this awesome writer, poet, leaving, and they're recruiting me, and she's my cultural mother, I'm not going to betray the trust, our familyhood, but just as important, our people. But what I had to do was to create, like you're doing here, the institutional structures, what we call independent black institutions. You see? And that's why I changed my name. Because Donnell Lee had become so popular, nationally and almost internationally, I couldn't get anything done. Nothing, okay? I got the position at Howard University, poet in residence, And that's when I really discovered who God is, black women. Okay.
I got a piece back there
Right.
called Primordial.
And
She's a
so
black woman.
my only point is that you are, a younger generation, are following in the footsteps of the Gwendolyn Brookses, of the Paul Robesons, of the W.B. Du Boises, of the Margaret and Charlie Burroughs, okay? You fall in that footsteps, okay? And it's more than an honor to be here. It's Pigment International made this possible, okay? I had no idea what I was coming into, okay? But by coming here, what it does for me, it just says yes. What we've done and continue to do is critical. And I'll just end my remarks. This is my latest book, Talk About Women. And that's what we are giving to the brothers and sisters that are visiting today. And we were the first publishers to put out a book prior to 45 becoming president, not our president. We did that, okay? They might give us permission, all right? We did it. Nobody paid for it but us. We did it. That's why this is critical. And that's why Pigment International is critical. You know what I'm saying? As a guerrilla warrior, you got to establish your stuff first. And then you go where the other resources are and try to get those resources. And don't feel bad to get anything from the city or from the state or from the federal government. That's our tax money. When the Negroes and the black people want to criticize us for having the charter schools, we're paying for that. That's our tax money. So all these white charters can come in with black faces and set up in our community, but once we get the money, you're going to criticize us. And so, you know, I mean, our yearly budget, our schools, over $14 million, all right? But we have black people working for that. That's what you and your wife and others that you're working with, and that's what Pigment International, that's why it's so important. Their magazine, I've seen 2 issues, it's professional in the black side, but also it's professional on the white side. You see, anybody that got any damn sense can pick up the magazine and say, oh, okay, where did this come from? All right? And so you recognize here, so you got Pigment International in terms of what they're producing and what they're doing in terms of the democratization of art. What you're doing here, and see, the remarkable thing about this is your work. You can't even visualize the kind of time and energy and the hours and the days and the months and the years that it took to get to do all this, all right? And I've been writing for over 50 years, all right? Now, this is just some of my work, but my point is you document what you've done, okay? This is a book. This is a book, okay? And so I just want to say, young brother, and hope I can meet your wife before I leave here, is that stay strong. You got enemies out here. They're going to smile in your face every day, every day. But what keeps us strong are the people that we surround ourselves with. Before I left to come over here from Third World Press, Rose Perkins, who's been with us about 25 years or so, was her birthday. So we had a little birthday party for her, you know, and then I left and came over here. And so we on the right track, you know. So I can leave here most certainly with a smile. And next time I come here, I'm going to bring my wife with me.
Yes, I would love to meet her. Hey, this was a pleasure. This was really great. And you know, like I told you, I know of you. I've never met you before. But I know the influence that Third World Press has had on me just through the different books that I've written, you know, that I've read, from Chancellor Williams to, you know, Miseducation of the Negro to just all of these different books that were a different literary richness that was absent in the curriculum of schools and everything else. I mean, our whole story is not told. And the same way in the art world, your whole story is not told. And the artists that are most celebrated that are black are celebrated because they're telling an abstracted version of our story, or they're not telling our story at all.
So I come with the Black Arts Movement, and Afro Cobra, I got, yeah, I got it.
Word to Pillars. I got a chance
Well,
to
Mary
meet Word.
was my brother. Do you have this?
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you look at it closely,
did
my
it.
name is on here, on
yeah.
the side of the pancake box, right, okay. And before Murray passed, he came to see my wife and I, and brought us a painting that he basically did for us, okay. But I taught at Howard University with Jeff Downson, but I was here when the Wall of Respect was, you know. Willard Brooks and I were the only two poets who read poetry at the unveiling of the Wall of Respect. So we have this tradition, but I keep coming back to, this is so impressive what you're doing. And for you and Pigment International to hook up, it's the future. And I hope I can become a part of that.
Yes, yes, yes. We definitely have to pursue that. The publishing and the book and everything. That would be great.
We can do it. Okay, brother.
All right. So.